Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started. You're listening to episode 82 of Literacy in Color. Today's episode is a really special one for me and a full circle moment because I'm joined by Sara Marye, founder of the Stellar Teacher Company and host of the Stellar Teacher podcast. Sara is someone who has supported and inspired thousands of upper elementary teachers, and she just so happens to be the person who encouraged me to start this podcast in the first place. And in this conversation, we dive into one of the most persistent challenges in literacy instruction in the upper elementary space, supporting readers in grades 3 to 5 who still need explicit phonics and decoding instruction. We talk about why reading difficulties don't just magically disappear after second grade, what effective intervention can even look like in the general classroom setting, and how the Stellar Reading Intervention Toolkit was designed to be practical, systematic, and age-appropriate for upper elementary students. So if you teach or support readers in grades 3 to 5 and have ever wondered, where do I even start? This episode is for you. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. And today is an incredibly special full circle moment for me because I have not only a really good friend in life on the show, but it's the person who encouraged me to start this podcast in the first place. And that is Sara Marye from Stellar Teacher Company. So a few years ago, I was a guest on her podcast, and it was the very first podcast I was ever a guest on. And after the show, she's like, oh my gosh, you have such a good podcasting voice. You're so knowledgeable. You should start your own. And every few months, she would send a little text message. Have you thought more about that podcast? And eventually, I went down that road, and here I am. It's because of her that we're in this in the first place. So welcome to the show, Sara. I am so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle, and thank you for that really kind welcome. I'm not going to lie, I'm like a little nervous to be on your show because you have absolutely killed it with your podcast. I love listening. Like I told you, I knew that you would be great at this. You were like, have a knack and a gift for it. So I'm so proud of you and so excited this show exists. And I'm absolutely honored to be a guest today. So thank you for having me.
Aw, cute. The waterworks. So special. So for those who don't already know all of the wonderful things that you do in the Stellar Teacher Company, can you give a little bit of background into who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I am Sara Marye. I am the creator and founder of the Stellar Teacher Company and host of the Stellar Teacher podcast. And in short, we support upper elementary literacy teachers. we do that in a variety of ways. We have a membership where we create resources, offer online professional development. We go into schools and offer PD. We do book studies. We post on Instagram our podcast episodes. And it's kind of like if there is a need in an upper elementary literacy classroom, we want to try to fill it in any way that we can. And along the way, we really want to provide encouragement and belief in teachers. Teachers play such an important part in the classroom. It's not having the right resources. It's not having the right knowledge. It is having just like that heart of a teacher. So we are also all about really empowering and encouraging and supporting teachers as individuals.
All amazing. And I love the work that you do and the platform that you have. And I know that you've helped so many along the way. And if you're an upper elementary teacher listening and you haven't delved into some of the goodness that the Stellar Teacher Company has to offer, you'll definitely want to head that way. And today we're going to be chatting about reading intervention in upper elementary. And actually, Sara, you and your team have developed something called the Intervention Toolkit.
Yeah. I mean, it's very simple because I'm like, I don't know. I'm not creative when it comes to naming things. So we created the Stellar Reading Intervention Toolkit. And it really was this idea of how do we create a toolkit for upper elementary teachers to help students that struggle with reading. Because I'm sure, as you know, reading challenges don't end in second grade.
Yeah, definitely. And then what do you think is so uniquely challenging about literacy instruction when we're thinking about upper elementary in comparison to those primary levels?
I feel like this is such a, I don't know, like a cliche, right? It's like when you get to like in K2, you're learning to read, and in third through fifth grade, you're reading to learn. But there is, I think, a lot of truth in that. And so I think, like I said, reading challenges don't end necessarily in second grade. It's not like this automatic thing, like just because you made it through K2, you're guaranteed to start third grade with all of the skills and knowledge and ability to decode text fluency. But the problem is if you enter third grade with significant phonics gaps, right? You aren't decoding and you're not reading fluently, you are going to struggle to access all of the grade level material. And that struggle is probably going to continue in third, fourth, and fifth grade because most upper elementary curriculums don't have built-in phonics. They don't either have the time allotment or even the materials for teachers to go back and provide that support and that reinforcement. And phonics gaps don't just impact reading, they impact writing as well. So if you have a student that goes into third grade and they are missing some of their phonics knowledge, they're going to struggle in reading and they're going to struggle in writing. And if they are struggling in reading and writing, then they're really struggling to access any of the content. And so they're going to just sort of struggle, coast. School is going to be difficult and challenging for them. And then I think too, with the addition of testing, teachers in the upper grades feel this immense pressure to teach to the test. And oftentimes we make teaching to the test more of a priority than pausing and actually going back and trying to fill those literacy gaps because schools put more of an emphasis on test results than students' actual abilities to read.
Yeah, it's so difficult because the upper elementary teacher is trying to provide this grade level curriculum and go by their grade level standards. And when you have such big gaps, sometimes you just don't know where to go or how to fill in those gaps.
Well, and it's like, I know every grade has their challenges, but I really do think upper elementary teachers have these challenges because it's, like you said, grade level content, right? They're responsible for teaching the standards, but they also are responsible for preparing for testing, but then they're also responsible for filling gaps. And that's a lot of pressure for one teacher to take on with one school year and a lot of kids.
Yeah. And then you serve a lot of teachers through your membership and Facebook groups and all of the wonderful things that you do. So what were some of the patterns that you noticed that made you say, hey, upper elementary teachers, they need help with explicit phonics instruction and decoding support?
Yeah. So this is something that I actually really noticed or became maybe aware of when I was a fourth grade classroom teacher. Now, I started out my teaching experience as a first grade teacher and a second grade teacher. So I had experience teaching phonics and I was at a school that provided explicit phonics instruction. Like I remember teaching my students the 6 sounds of OUGH. And so to me, like I had knowledge with that. But my co-teachers in fourth grade, we would often talk about how they would have students in their class that were struggling with reading and they were at a loss. They had no idea how to support these students. And they would talk about how they were never taught how to teach reading in their college classes, right? They never had a college class on teaching phonics or decoding. None of the professional development that we received through our district was targeted to upper elementary teachers who need to provide phonics and decoding support. None of the materials that we had access to were available for her upper elementary teachers to fill in those gaps. Of course, we had access to the book room, and there were decodables created for kindergarteners and first graders. But I always felt bad, and they did too. It's like it feels wrong to give a fourth grader a book that was written for a kindergarten student. And so from the very first time that I started interacting with upper elementary students and teachers, I knew that this was a problem. And then as I became more involved with the Stellar Teacher Company and built a bigger audience, we provide a lot of resources to teachers. And inevitably, regardless of what we put out there, teachers would always come back and say, okay, but I have students that cannot read. Like I'm a fourth grade teacher and I still have kids that cannot read. Do you have materials that I can use to support them? Like I need to teach these kids how to read. I don't know how to do that. Do you have anything I can use to help my 3-5 students to learn how to read? So creating this toolkit has been on my bucket list for years. And I'm so glad that we were finally able to create it because it is such a need that exists in upper elementary.
Yeah. And you could have just threw together some resources that can address this need and that need. But I love the fact that you were comprehensive in this vision and creating something fully cohesive to really help teachers assess and drive their instruction and figure out where to go and pinpoint needs, and something that they can follow through a whole progression rather than just trying to piecemeal something together for upper elementary, which I feel like is often the case.
Well, and I was going to say, as you know, it's like, especially with phonics instruction, a lot of times we can't piecemeal that together, right? Like it has to be done systematically. It has to be done explicitly. And so you can't just grab sort of random resources and teach things out of order. There needs to be some structure to it. And so it's like, if we were going to do this, I was like, okay, we're going to do the full thing. We're going to make it a thing.
Full shebang.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about the upper elementary students that we serve and we notice that some students are having some difficulties, who do you think this intervention toolkit is really geared towards? Everyone who's kind of functioning below grade level, or a certain subgroup of students?
Yeah, I was going to say, I always love reminding teachers. And in this example, like our intervention kit is going to work for a lot of students. It's not going to work for every student. And that's the same with any sort of educational material that exists out there. And so it's really important for teachers to know the needs of their students, and even I think also their own needs as educators. And so our intervention program, our intervention kit, is really great for 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade students who have just general gaps in their reading. They maybe show no other signs of struggle other than the fact that they cannot decode the words. They've got great comprehension, they've got great vocabulary, but when you put a text in front of them, they struggle to read it. In upper elementary, we don't always have the luxury of going back to the very beginning and teaching every individual letter and every individual blend because we just don't have time. And so our intervention kit is really best for students that already have knowledge of the individual consonants, the short vowels, some of those basic blends, but it's really those long vowel patterns that are tripping them up, because that really is, I think, one of the hurdles for upper elementary students is that there are so many combinations that make the vowel sounds, and then there's so many variants of vowels. And so that's really where we spend a lot of our focus on. So if you have students that are needing to start from the beginning, right? Like they do not know the sounds of the consonants, then our program is not going to be the best fit for those students. And then in addition, other students who might need either more support would be students that have a dyslexia diagnosis. The routines and the activities that we do are definitely helpful and work for students that have dyslexia, but oftentimes those students might need more than what we provide in our intervention program. It really is created for general education classroom teachers to use in their general classroom setting. And then special education students, depending on their specific goals and needs that they have in their IEP. So really, this is perfect for the general education classroom teacher that has those sort of basic gaps in their students. And really, it is, I think, best suited. Like one of the things that we kept in mind is that most of the time, upper elementary teachers do not have the phonics training or the phonics knowledge, right? So they don't even know how to go about, how do I teach phonics to my students? And so this is really perfect for the teacher that feels like they don't know what a phoneme is, right? They don't know what a grapheme is. They don't know all of the sounds of OUGH. Like this kit is perfect for them because it literally is scripted, walks them through everything. It's one of those things where I feel like anybody could use it and successfully teach a kid how to read.
That's really helpful. And you think about students who have huge gaps and maybe they're seen by an interventionist and they have longer lessons, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and intensive intervention. But sometimes there are students who are not as far behind,
Yeah.
but wouldn't qualify for intervention.
Yeah.
And yet the classroom teacher still has to support them. This really sounds perfect. And I love the fact that your lessons are short and sweet. They're geared to be about 15 minutes
Yep.
a day. And I think that's really something that's practical for a classroom teacher and not feeling overwhelmed to provide intervention within the tier 1 setting and to know that, hey, I can be really efficient with my time and provide really targeted, explicit instruction that's all painted out for you really clearly.
Yeah, when we were putting this together, before we even started, we really asked our audience, both sort of what do you need? What would you use? Like, what are your challenges? Because one of the things that I know is that if a resource or a program is overwhelming for the teacher or unrealistic from a time standpoint, like they're not going to use it. And so while it would be great, and I think in a lot of cases, being able to provide 30 to 45 minutes of intervention would be amazing, if that's not realistic for a classroom teacher, then they're not going to use it. And so most of the teachers talked about how it's like, if I was going to do intervention in my classroom, I'd have about 15 minutes. And I was like, okay, then like this is our sort of challenge. Our goal in creating this is we need to come up with really effective, high quality routines and activities that will get the job done, but in a short amount of time. So we have to cut the fluff and make it just really focused, really concise, so that way teachers can feel like they can get it done in a limited amount of time.
And when you think about your lesson plan structure and everything, I love how you incorporate a lot of repetition. And some people might have a faulty understanding of why things might be repetitive. It all goes back to the science of learning too, and wanting to make sure that things are being instilled in a child's brain. So can you just talk more about why you included some of your intentional repetitive routines throughout your lesson plan structures?
Yeah. So there's, kind of a couple reasons. And, to your point, like especially with only 15 minutes, we want students to be able to end the lesson and actually feel like they've acquired some new phonics knowledge and have things actually stick. And so there's repetition with the routines. Every Monday is the exact same lesson structure, just a different phonics scale. Every Tuesday is the exact same thing. And the reason why every week follows the exact same structure is because if there's repetition with the routines, and even throughout the week, there's a phonemic awareness warm up every day that's relatively similar. But if there is repetition with the routines, it's going to make it a whole lot easier for the teachers to provide, like to execute to their students and for the students to engage in. We always talk about like anytime there's a classroom routine that is going to reduce the cognitive load on a student, there's so many thoughts that goes through a student's head, right? Like, what are we doing today? Who am I going to be working with? All of that stuff. So if they just know when I come to this table, like this is what I'm doing, they can focus on the actual content. But then there's also a lot of repetition with the phonics skills. And the whole purpose of that is to make it stick. These are students that have never been explicitly taught the sounds of AI or how to break apart a word. And so in order for those skills to become mastery, students need to repeat them, right? It's like practice makes permanence. And so students have to get a lot of practice with breaking apart words. They have to get a lot of practice with building words. They have to get a lot of practice with reading words and practicing fluency in order for that to become automatic for them. So the repetition is sort of a vehicle that eventually leads to what we're teaching becoming a permanent part of the students, their knowledge and their abilities.
Yeah, I so appreciate you talking about both lenses there because it's so important for us to remember as educators that we want to make sure that students are being successful in what we're giving them to practice, so that they do get to mastery for whatever skill. And I think all too often too, I love how you talked about the structure aspect as well, because sometimes we sit at the small group table and we're scrambling on what to do next or where to start. But if we were only to have a structure in mind, and if we were only to know on Mondays, I always do this, or this is the way that my lessons will go from one component to the next, it takes the cognitive load off you as a teacher to figure out what to do next, and also for the students to be more efficient and on task and knowing this is what's expected of me, I think is such a great management tip for all teachers.
Yeah. And I was always that teacher that when it came time for a small group, I'm like, what are we doing today? I hate admitting that, but that is the reality, which is why I think like in so many instances, I'm like, okay, I was that teacher. There are so many teachers like that. How can we eliminate that? So that way, when a teacher has a group of students at a small group table for 15 minutes, it is actually a useful part of the instructional day.
Yeah. Express Readers decodable books have a special format with positive and complete storylines, highly controlled text, extra spacing and enlarged font to support all learners, and relatable, lovable characters. The books are colorful and durable, and the stories have a sense of humor with engaging, recurring characters to keep student interest. Express Readers Decodables provide the perfect place to apply learned phonics skills, support fluency building, and foster a love for reading. With alignments to most core foundational curricula and in-depth decodable book guides, educators can feel prepared without losing any prep time to create or plan on their own, nor any added costs. Be sure to check out the link in the show notes and ask for your free sample at www.expressreaders.org today. And then maybe you can walk us through your 5-part structure. So what that week at a glance looks like.
Yeah. So each week, students are working on one specific phonics skill. So maybe it is, the first unit focuses on the long vowels spelled with the vowel consonant E. And so for the first week, that's, the A blank E spelling pattern. And so that skill carries out through the entire week. So we have 5 different days. These could be done as daily lessons, but also if you have a 4-day week, or if you only have time for intervention 3 days a week, you could condense these and do all of them in a week or spread them out. So making sure that teachers always feel like they have the flexibility to make a routine, like a 5-part routine, work for their schedule. So the first day, you're going to introduce the target spelling pattern for the week. You want to explain the rule. And one of the things that we were really intentional about is having teachers share examples that were both single syllable and multisyllable, because I think that is also a big challenge in upper elementary. A lot of times students can be successful with phonics in 2nd grade. In 3rd grade, you notice there's gaps and they're struggling. And if you ask the 2nd grade teacher, like, hey, did they struggle with reading? They're like, no, they were great. Well, 3rd grade, we have the introduction of so many more multisyllabic words. And so students need to have an understanding of how do these long vowel patterns and spelling patterns show up in multisyllabic words. So explaining the rule, sharing examples, and then practicing with a phonemic awareness drill. So maybe you give your students some of these words, both single syllable and multisyllable, and they're going to do some blending, they're going to do some segmenting, but they're going to practice paying attention to that individual sound in isolation, right? So they're going to hear the entire word, but they are going to be able to identify that individual sound. So that is the first day. Now, the second day, now that they're familiar with it, they're going to review the target spelling pattern. And every day we warm up with a phonemic awareness drill. So again, every day getting practice with isolating that sound. And then the second day is practicing with some spelling. So we're going to introduce like a phonics activity. So they might do an activity like tap it, map it, graph it. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. It's great. It's fun. Building words, sound boxes, but we're giving students an opportunity to build words and manipulate, whether it's tapping the sounds or moving letter tiles, something that they're able to sort of move and manipulate, but really focusing in on building words and writing words with the specific sound spelling pattern. So spelling words at the individual level. On the 3rd day, again, review the target skill, warm up with a phonemic awareness drill. And then the 3rd day, we're really focusing on trying to build fluency. So students will read word lists and phrase lists and sentence lists that have the word with the target spelling pattern. So the goal is that they're able to, now that they have awareness of this word, they can hopefully start to read these words with a little more automaticity and eventually reading sentences. And again, with all of the word lists and the phrase lists and the sentence lists that we provide, we start with really basic single syllable words, and then we start to build in some more multisyllabic words. Students who struggle with reading often know that they struggle with reading. And I think when they see a big word, it's like they want to just give up because they're like, I don't know how to read, so I'm not even going to try it. So we really want to help build students build their confidence. So that way they're like, hey, it's a big word, but I know the sounds in it and I can actually break it apart and read it. So that's day 3 is working on reading words, phrases, and sentences. And then day 4, they, again, review the skill, warm up with a phonemic awareness drill. And then we have a short text that has an abundance of words with that sound spelling pattern. And so we're going to not treat this as just a reading the text for the sake of reading words with the sound spelling pattern, but also viewing it as a comprehension experience as well. So we're going to build our background knowledge before we start reading. We're going to read the text. Before we start reading the text, we might go through and have them highlight all of the words that follow our sound spelling pattern. After we read it, they're going to have some sort of response in writing, because I think sometimes there can be this disconnect, right? We can do like a phonics lesson in isolation, but we forget that that eventually needs to transfer to their actual reading experiences. And so anytime that we do a reading of a text in these intervention lessons, we want it to feel very similar. Like if you're doing a read aloud or anything in sort of your general comprehension lesson, we want that to feel similar during the intervention lessons as well. So day 4, they're reading a text and responding. And then day 5 is review and assessment. So again, review the target skill, warm up with phonemic awareness, and then you're going to give your students basically a spelling test. You're going to have them practice their encoding both words and then sentences. And then this is a great way to sort of do a quick check with the assessment. And again, in the intervention kit, the lists include single syllable words and multisyllable words. So you might see, okay, my student, they can spell this word when it's a single syllable, but they're struggling with the multisyllable words. So then you might need to give some more support with that. But it's a great way to sort of see what have they acquired throughout the week. And then every day 5, we also have a fun game for them to play, because again, we wanted this to be fun and engaging for students. And hopefully, I don't know, some students maybe don't love a spelling test, but if they know that at the end of it, there's a game to play, they might be a little bit more excited to go through it. So yeah, day 5 is doing a little spelling test and then being able to play a game. And then that same routine repeats every single week, just with a new sound spelling pattern. So it becomes really easy for the teacher to implement, because everything becomes so repetitive, easy for the students to follow through, but they're getting instruction on, all of these phonics skills that they might have missed in the lower grades.
I love that. It's so thorough. It hits on everything. And because often we can think about reading difficulties and you're only tackling the decoding aspect, but we see that it's so multifaceted and reading difficulties can impact so many different other arenas. I especially love that you're also targeting those multisyllabic words, because that's where I think so many kids get tripped up. And the single syllable word can feel so reliable too when we think about phonics, and you learn your grapheme phoneme correspondences and they work really predictably in single syllable words. And then you're thrown a multisyllabic word and suddenly you have a schwa in there. And
it's like, wait a minute, I don't know how to do this anymore.
Vowel flexing and like things are going awry and all funky. And so for them to have that flexibility, I think in both scenarios can be really powerful, because it's setting them up to have that set for variability from the start when they're working on the concept, seeing it functioning in both ways.
Well, and we thought, as we were putting this together, we thought a lot about, again, going back to this idea of most of the time when students struggle with reading in the upper grades, they know that they struggle, right? They know that they maybe aren't the best reader in the class, and that could be a source of shame or embarrassment. And so we thought about, what are all of the things that we can include to make this sort of seem like oblivious to those students that this might be intervention. And so it's like, okay, multisyllabic words, like they see those in other writing activities, word study activities, comprehension activities. And so if we include those in these lessons, they might be less inclined to think that what they're doing is baby work or easy work.
Definitely. And you had a few easy words, and now it's like we're scaffolding you to tackle the hard words too. So it's a slow build up too.
Yeah, building their confidence.
I love. Your resources are so gorgeous. Every time I see anything that
you're so sweet.
It was in your little resource library. It's all the heart eye emojis. And this kit is no different, but your controlled texts in particular are really, really nice. And like you said before, you would feel really bad about putting an upper elementary student into something that was designed for a kindergartner. And I think that your texts do a really nice job as feeling age appropriate and feeling like something an upper elementary student should be reading. So can you share a little bit of the intentionality behind that?
Yeah. And I think that comes back to, like I said, when I was a 4th grade teacher and talking with my coworkers about how it's like, okay, we have these kids that are struggling with reading. Like, we don't want to make it any harder for them than it has to be. And so we wanted this resource to look exactly like all of our other resources. So whether you are the student who is participating in the intervention lesson or you're a student who is observing, maybe walking past the table, it is not visibly obvious that these students are getting remedial work, because all of the materials have a very mature upper elementary feel to it. And the texts were really fun to put together. And also kind of a challenge because if you're thinking about, especially the earlier ones were more challenging because we're limited by spelling patterns to include. But we tried to make sure that the font size is appropriate. We tried to, when possible, include like a nonfiction text. So that way we could also include text features. I feel like anytime it's nonfiction, it's going to be about a topic that might be more interesting to students. You can include text features. So all of that is just going to elevate the look of the text as well. And interest and engagement was also important to us. And so I think it's maybe easier to find nonfiction topics for students to read about. For example, this is maybe one of my favorite passages because I think it's so interesting, but for the lesson set where they're learning the sounds for the diphthong O-I, O-Y, the passage is on a cochlear implant. And so students read that, and if you're reading about a cochlear implant, you're not going to think, oh, this is remedial work. Like I'm not getting intervention because the content is interesting and it appeals to them. So yeah, we were really thoughtful with how we put the text together to make sure that they have topics that were interesting, images that were interesting, but the overall style and look is not going to give away that they're doing remedial reading work.
So powerful. And again, it just speaks to that whole motivation, self-esteem component that comes with the shame of not being on grade level just yet. So no, amazing. And when you think about students progressing through these lessons, something that we can often see is students will do really well in the lesson and they're performing well, they're doing well on assessments, but we don't necessarily always see the transfer. So is there anything that educators can do intentionally to support transfer into what they're working on in the tier 1 setting in terms of grade level material?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is so important and I was going to mention this a little bit earlier, but I think this is important to keep in mind with whatever we're teaching. We have to remember that the ultimate goal of our instruction is for student application outside of the lesson, right? It's not to just, okay, let's just get through another lesson. Let's cross the box off. Let's, teach all the components. It's like, are we seeing this instruction show up in the students' day-to-day reading and writing? And so first of all, just at the very basic level, if we're giving students practice with actually learning the sound spelling patterns that they are missing, they at least have the knowledge and hopefully the tools to become successful. And it's, like I said, there's some students that require a lot more support, but like I know when I taught 4th grade, the school that I taught at, our primary teachers did not have a phonics program to teach, right? So they're sort of just winging it. And so there are a lot of students who are capable readers. They were just never given the knowledge, right? They just never were told the sounds that certain patterns make. And so in a lot of cases, if some students simply know, it's going to be easier for them to apply it. But we can teach it within the context of this beautiful little lesson, and then it's hard to see that transfer show up in other places. So this is where I think it's important for the teacher to really sort of be in tune with the students, both at the intervention small group lesson and what's going on in the whole group lesson. And I think, again, paying attention to what do you notice happening? Do we see the breakdown at the multisyllabic word? Do we see the breakdown with the reading? Do we see the breakdown with the spelling? And sort of be aware of what's happening when you're providing the instruction and not just continuing to progress through the lesson because it's time to go on to week 2, but it's like we're progressing because our students are showing us they're ready to progress. But then I think sometimes even providing prompts to your students and reminding them that it's like, okay, this text you're going to, notice, maybe have them go through and highlight or circle some of the sound spelling patterns that you've recently studied with them, or giving them sentence stems that include some of those words that they've practiced in intervention. Anytime that they can sort of see, it's like, okay, this is what I'm doing in intervention and it shows up in my tier 1 classes as well. That can be helpful, I think, both with content, but then also with routines as well. A lot of times we don't do phonemic awareness drills in upper elementary, but you very easily could do those as well. And so I think trying to pull a lot of the elements that you're doing in intervention and either just highlight them or practice them or make them visible to your students outside of the intervention lessons, kind of just to jog their memory that it's like, wait a minute, I do know how to do these things outside of the intervention table as well.
Yeah, that's really great advice because a lot of times when we think about intervention that feels so disconnected from what you're doing in the classroom, then the intervention can also feel siloed and in a box. And it takes a really knowledgeable and skilled and artful teacher to bridge those connections to say hey, these are the things that we're working on intervention. And I can still notice a name and pull those out when we're working in the classroom setting, even if texts aren't necessarily controlled.
Mm-hmm.
We just learn about OI and this vocabulary word happens to have an OI in it. And sometimes we have to explicitly say those connections because they're not going to pick up on them on our own. And I think It just takes a little intention, and that's not always easy to do. The more practice and just experience you have doing that, it will become more, I guess, second nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, when we think about assessment and moving students along the scope and sequence, how can we progress through your intervention kit? Like, would you ever repeat a week, or if students are not showing mastery of a skill, or how would it work for your particular program?
Yeah. So assessment can happen at any point. And that's one of the things that teachers have asked us. It's like, okay, how do I assess? It's like, well, you can assess every single day, right? Are the students able to participate in the phonemic awareness drills? Are they able to spell the words correctly? Can they read the words? So I think the 2 points during the week that are really great to really pay close attention to are on Thursday when students are reading the decodable text. And that can happen. Just can have students read individually. You can have them partner read. But if you can check in with the students and see, are they able to read a couple sentences fluently, especially the words that have the target spelling pattern, that will give you a good idea of their fluency practice. But then on Friday, when you do the encoding test, because then you can look and see like, okay, how did they spell the sound? And it also, because you're going to be looking at the target spelling pattern, but you can also see, did they get the entire word spelled correctly? So are there other spelling patterns that you've previously taught that they are either getting correctly or that they miss? So the spelling test can really give you a lot of information. But at the end of every unit, we have a review week that pulls in all of the target sounds. So like I said, our first unit is with like the long vowel spelling pattern, vowel consonant E. So after you teach all of those, we have 1 week that follows the exact same pattern, but they're looking at words that have all of the spelling patterns that you've taught for the last 4 or 5 weeks. And so that week, I think, is a really good week to get a pulse, because there's been some time and some space between your initial instruction to see if it is actually stuck. So I think unless you notice that your students really are not grasping it at all, like they're really, really struggling, but if you're just like, ooh, I'm not entirely sure, I would say go through the entire unit. And then when you get to that review week, see how they do, because every week, the idea is students are going to be building their confidence. They're going to be building their word knowledge. And sometimes you might be teaching about the O blank E, but all of a sudden students like, oh, I get it now. Like now I understand like A blank E and I blank E. So things click with students at different rates. And so the review week, I think, can be a really good sort of opportunity to see, what do my students know? And do we need to go back and either review a lesson, repeat an activity, focus on something? But I think in general, unless you notice that your students are like really, really struggling, like keep moving forward, because everything that you taught gets reviewed again. They're going to see those same words in the text and in the other words, because everything builds. So sometimes it might take a while for things to click, but they will.
Yeah, yeah. And that's part of the art of being a responsive teacher is we want things to not be easy breezy for our students when the learning is happening, because they have to grapple with the information a little bit.
That productive struggle.
Yeah, yeah. But if it's nails on a chalkboard kind of moment, then we know we need to pivot a little more. Yeah. Abort.
Yep.
So when it comes to intervention in the upper elementary setting, are there any misconceptions that you want to clear the air about, where we can perhaps have a new point of view moving forward?
I don't know if this is like a misconception, but I think it is like one of those things that it's like, if you have a student that is struggling with reading, that is not going to resolve itself on its own. Right? Like if they are struggling to physically read the words, if they cannot decode, we can hope that it will get better. And we think, okay, if I just keep doing my normal tier 1 instruction, it will not get better. Like a student who struggles with decoding, we need to pause and fill in the gaps, figure out what they know, what they don't know. And so I would just encourage teachers that rather than putting it off for the next semester, putting it off for the next year, get started in trying to help that student. And I know a lot of upper elementary teachers, I think, feel reluctant because it feels very heavy to try to have to back up and figure out, what is this student missing and how can I fill it in? And maybe you don't feel very confident that you have the tools or the knowledge or the skills to help the student, but you know something, right? You know something, and even if it's a little bit getting started, that is going to help the student. And I always tell teachers, if they're like, I don't know how to teach phonics, like, what am I supposed to do? It's like, you can learn with your students. You're not going to learn how to do this if you never pull an intervention lesson and start trying to address the gap. So if you feel inadequate, get started. You can learn as you go, but we cannot ignore the reading gaps in upper elementary. We have to pause and fill them in.
Definitely. And we've learned that this whole wait and see approach is a wait to fail model, and kids aren't going to catch up if they're already at that point. And we need to make sure with a sense of urgency that we're addressing their needs. And sometimes the upper elementary student can be really tricky because they might have certain skills under their belts and then missing a couple of holes, and then they might have a few more things along the scope. And so it really requires a good assessment to figure out like, what are the exact gaps and how can I address those exact gaps? And maybe you'll see them have more success with 1 week from the next because they already had a little bit of an understanding from their primary years on a certain skill, whereas another one was faultier. So it's important to be responsive to their needs, fill those gaps. I think in the upper elementary, have a little more fire under you and moving at a brisker
Well, I was going to say, it's like not to
well.
like put the pressure on, but it's also one of those things where it's like there's more opportunities in elementary for students to get the support than there is in middle school and high school. It's kind of like if they leave in 5th grade, it is going to be even so much harder in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. But like their challenges aren't going to go away. And so it really is. It's like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. I don't want to be like, it's your last chance, but it kind of is. And so we need to do it. But, again, it's like I always love to empower and encourage teachers. There are things that you can do that can make a difference for these students that they can't read a text on their own. They struggle to read. There are definitely things that you can do to help. So it is not a lost cause. We just have to get started in supporting those students.
It's never too late.
No, it isn't.
Never too late for students to get support, but you're so right. Those supports dwindle as students get older and they're harder to find. So we got to do what we can when the supports are readily available. And now I'm curious. I want to know what your favorite unit is in the intervention toolkit.
Oh man, that is a really great question. I really liked the diphthong unit simply because it only has 3 lessons. The OU, OW says ow, and OI says oi. But I really liked the passages right? Like I liked both of the texts in those, and the OU, OW one is about sound. And so we were able to build off of that in the next one. So again, there was some more cohesion with that entire unit. So that was, I don't know, maybe my favorite.
So fun. I really adore those passages. They're
Thank you.
So nice.
Thank you. We hope teachers and students enjoy them as well. Again, we were very thoughtful in putting these together and trying to think about how is this going to be something that a fourth or 5th grader would be interested in reading and not be like embarrassed to read.
Definitely. And that's the beauty too, where it's a printable that they can take home, put in their folder, practice it again, and get whatever kind of practice that they need.
Yep, absolutely.
So this has been such a wonderful conversation. And like I said, it's been such a joy having you on my show.
Thank you for having me.
And I can't wait to have you back again and we could chat about something else.
Well, I was going to say, and it's about time for you to show up on my podcast again too. So we'll just have to, it'll just be podcast interviews galore.
Good things happening in 2026,
Absolutely.
Right? Where can listeners connect with you further and find out more about this intervention toolkit?
Perfect. So if you are looking specifically for the intervention toolkit, you can go to stellarteacher.com/intervention. And then if you're interested in just the Stellar Teacher Company in general, want to find the podcast, our social media, you can go to our website, stellarteacher.com.
Awesome. And I'll be sure to link all of that in the show notes. So
thank you.
Thanks again for coming on my show.
Yes. Thanks for having me. And I'm so proud of you. I love that you have a podcast that I can be on.
Oh. Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.